Hi all, this is Monica Gagliano calling from Australia. I'm recording from my home. I live in a beautiful part of Australia which is very green and lush, and hopefully I'm bringing some of the sun to you. I'm going to be reading from the book That Spoke the Plant, and then it's my understanding that we're going to have a live Q&A session after this recording has been played. So I'm looking forward to connecting with you all, and thank you for the organizers for having me involved in this beautiful festival. Okay. Chapter O. Listen, then you might hear something being spoken. Oringam. Oringam means thank you for listening in the language of the plants. It is not a word as we humans understand it, because its meaning cannot be spoken, nor can it be heard. However, we can experience it by feeling with our bodies and listening to what our ears cannot hear. When we learn to listen to plants without the need to hear them speak, a language that we have forgotten emerges. It is a language beyond words, one that does not wander or pretend or mislead. It is a language that conveys its rich and meaningful expression by bypassing the household of our mind and directly connecting one spirit to another. This language belongs to plants, and so do these stories. This story starts from the middle. The middle is a swinging hammock, hanging barely above the wooden floor of a small steel hut. With its typical thatched hip roof, walls of a pastel blue color, decorated with the intricate geometric patterns distinctive of the Shipibo people of the Amazon lowlands of Peru, this is the hut of my dreams. I had dreamt of this exact place a few months earlier, back home in Australia. On the first night, I had dreamt of standing by the outside of a small hut, noticing the black labyrinthian patterns painted on its walls. The little door was wide open, and the entrance pitch black. Climbing up 3 little wooden steps was all that was required to enter. A truly simple task, unless one came face to face with a gatekeeper. As the yellow-green eyes of a black jaguar emerged shimmering out of the darkness of the doorway and pierced deeply into mine, I woke up. The same scene materialized on the following night, but with no feline warden in sight. I peered inside the hut and was surprised to see a fire burning in the middle of the room and a young man tending it. The firekeeper gestured me to sit by the fire to face him, and so I did. As the orange and yellow flames danced in the space between us, the man instructed me to sing. Despite my most sincere efforts, no sound ever came out of me, and I woke up. The following night, I sat at the fire with a much older man in Shipibo dress. He was grinning at me with a flicker of satisfaction in his dark, narrow eyes, as I sang a bizarre tune made of sounds I could not hear and meanings I could not speak. I woke up that morning knowing that somewhere that hut, that man, and those strange songs were waiting for me. This is our Socoba, a tropical tree also known as Bechago Caspi, quite literally called me to the outskirts of Pucallpa. So a few months later, I set off for Peru. Almost 30 feet tall, Socoba stands tall and proud with a crown of perfumed white flowers adorning her head of brilliant green foliage. She breathes up high in the sky, while her feet are firmly held in a moist, at times flooded ground, just like the humans she dwells with. Here, the earth secures the roots of both Socoba and the Shipibo people, and the cosmos unconcerned by the specific nature of their complexion, inscribes itself onto their skin. The Shipibo were the cosmic pattern of meandering lines and hidden luminous harmonies on their painted faces and bodies. Likewise, Socoba wears them as a ceremonial dress of rough mottled bark. As these cosmic inscriptions pierce through the very skin tasked with keeping the outside world out and all of the inside in, the worlds beyond this world emerge, percolating in to be carefully mapped out. It is at the skin that the tree and the shaman meet, a crossroad of sacred offerings where a wound is hatched in the body of one to heal that of the other. The Socoba tree stretches her arboreal arms to the sky and over the maloka, the ceremonial hut, the beautifully painted temple space where Don M, the Shipibo man I had seen in my dream, conducts his healing ceremonies and curative rituals as the maestro vegetalista, the plant shaman, for the local community. Don M had told me that Socoba called him that morning, soon after my arrival at his home. He had heard her call and met her whistling one of those strange tunes while swirling in the air around her torso white puffs of sacred jungle tobacco, or mapacho, as Amazonian shamans call Nicotiana rustica. Socoba had informed him of how she had come to my dreams to call me to this place to work with her. Then she proceeded to gift him some of her bark so he could prepare a concoction for me. As the highly respected planta maestra that she is, Socoba was committed to teach me about herself as a nifty healer of the physical as well as emotional and spiritual body. To open to this plant teacher-human student dialogue, all I needed to do was to follow the dieta, a time during which I was to ingest the plant regularly while in isolation, observing total sexual abstinence and an uninspiring diet of unseasoned vegetables and rice. So I drank the concoction made from her bark that night, and the following night too, as Socoba swiftly aligned with my present and quietly befriended my past. And I drank her again and again for the following weeks of my apprenticeship, while in a hammock that swung barely off the wooden floor of the little hut I had dreamt of months before, lying in my own bed half a world away. I'm gonna skip so. In the light of evolution, learning by listening to plants must have served us well and afforded us major selective benefits. Those who cared to listen would have been less likely to make dreadful mistakes while distinguishing which plants were edible and beneficial. Because their approach was far from ignorant, being well informed by the plants themselves, those who listened would have been able to test and apply the newly acquired knowledge straight away. Just think about it. A random trial and error approach would have taken a long time and cost lots of lives before any useful and practical information could be revealed to us. Of course, learning by listening did not eliminate the fact that the process of discovering, remembering, and sharing a vast amount of information about medicinal plants still would have been accompanied by a huge cognitive inventory of their therapeutic properties. Our mind would have had to manage this complexity, perhaps by dividing up the information into smaller morsels, sets of distinguishable qualities that best represented a therapeutic property. These classifications would have served us as a powerful mnemonic device to prop up the finite capacity of our mind. But what a relief to know that none of it could ever be forgotten. What a relief to know that these enormous vegetal archives would always be open for consultation. Plant knowledge is in and with the plants themselves, never lost, always available to those who listen. Indeed, plants seem to know as well and what we need. In some herbalistic circles, it is said that plants are willing to help us and are keen to share their knowledge with us. As plants continue to co-evolve with humans and other animal species, it is also suggested that new properties and functions for plants will emerge as new needs develop. The obvious question then is not so much about whether or even what they know, but how and why they do. From an utilitarian perspective, it is, of course, valuable to know what a plant like Socoba can be used to treat conditions that affect the circulatory system. But how does an Amazonian tree like Socoba know about the functioning of the human body and the healing of its dysfunctions? And why would she hold such an understanding? Answers cannot be given to questions that we are not ready to ask, and at the time, this question never even occurred to me. They materialized only when I began writing this phytobiographical account of Socoba 6 years later. Then, like a dog with a bone, my unrelenting mind was hungry for the impossible answers to these bizarre, even unbearable questions. I simply had no idea. But to think that the riddle could be solved by virtue of a merely mental workout was the real fallacy. Instead, it all happened effortlessly. As the question emerged, the answers did too. This is when Socoba woke me up in the early hours of the day to elucidate them. And her answer was as natural and light as oxygen. How can a plant readily know us when we are hardly aware of the plantness within ourselves? The theoretical notion of a plantness reverberating within the human body has been contemplated since ancient times. Perceived through the veil of motionlessness, even by our most brilliant minds, this plantness has seemed inaccessible and even deliberately hidden from us. Well, that is true when we try to think of it. It is because of its unthinkability, in the sense that it cannot be comprehended in a conceptual way, that only the experience of feeling it, by virtue of the patterns of information that it delivers, makes it real. Sorry, we have mosquitoes. When we feel it, this plantness is allowed to emanate unconcealed within us at all times. What appear to be intangible, an obscure otherness, is unveiled as the intimate familiarity of an obvious and luminous likeness. As far from being impenetrable and distant, the plant is revealed as an unquestionably open, literally. As philosopher Michael Marder puts it, the plant, of course, does not ask what water is, and he has no idea of water as a distinct object. Because in a vegetal openness, the plant is not separate from the exteriority of her milieu. And as elaborated directly by Socoba, the plant exists in a state of open communication in which the fiction of personalized boundaries collapses. In her grounded experience of life, she needs neither questions nor concepts of water to know water. In fact, she does not need to ask anything at all to know. This is how the plant knows the other. This is how she knows the human as herself. This knowing comes from being empty, but emptiness does not reduce the plant to a passive, spiritless, and objectified materiality, and we will consider the implication of this later, but rather liberates her vitality from the pursuit of fulfillment. Already fulfilled in every moment, always realized in her full potential, the plant is completely available to know her circumstances by listening deeply. For a human being to know this way is to be, at least momentarily, free from internal inconsistencies between attitudes and actions. It means to be empty of the socially indoctrinated belief system that prescribes the boundaries of how we are expected to perceive and behave in a given situation, and that justifies our actions even when they are unwise and out of sorts with our internal emotional and moral intelligence. As the preconceived ideas and judgment we make about the other are abandoned, we are finally available to listen to our circumstances as they present themselves in each moment. Then, as Socoba pointed out, we're open to know the other as ourselves. This way of knowing is not ephemeral, but earthly and concrete. This availability to truly listen by feeling the other as we meet is not empathy, which bears upon the empathizer projecting and depositing himself into the other in order to rediscover himself, a form of narcissism that makes the other a sort of imaginative variation of the empathizer. Instead, knowing by deep listening has the quality of a perfect surprise, pertinent to the moment of the encounter, not conditioned by anything inside one or the other, and thus not intentionally predetermined. The openness to this deep listening is oxygenated in the natural body made of blood and bones, or sap and fibers, where skins and barks are no longer perceived as functional boundaries that separate the inner and outer containing us. As it emerges into the space where one encounters the other, this openness reveals our participation in the communion with each other. Because the openness of plant being constantly invites our openness to being humans, our encounter with plants confronts us with the limit of our capacity for such embodied listening and active participation. Thus, plants come to represent the marker points of our resistance to transcend our narcissistic and anthropocentric propensities towards exceptionalism, a necessary requirement for entering such space. This was the teaching that Socoba the plant had come to share with me the human. But that wasn't all. So let's retrace our step back to Socoba and her arboreal arms stretched out and over the Maloka, with the beautiful Shipibo designs snaking across its walls somewhere outside Pucallpa. I'm gonna skip. Okay. It was nightfall by the time Don M came to fetch me for the ceremony. Stunned by the bewildering events of that afternoon, my walk over to the Maloka was, without a doubt, a clumsy one. Before entering the ceremonial hut, I looked up at the Socoba tree, beautifully and peacefully shining in the moonlight, just as she had done earlier in the sunlight. I entered the Maloka, sat down on the mattress placed on the floor for me, and cringed at the off-putting fizz of fermentation exhaled by a small plastic bottle Don M had just opened. Homemade and organic, the content was not lemonade soda, but the powerful psychedelic ayahuasca, the acrid brew he had prepared a few weeks ago, just before my arrival. Mapacho already hanging off his lip, Don M looked up at me with the exact same grin I had seen on his face when I first saw him so many months before in the dream that brought me here. Before I could plead to Socoba and the plant spirits for a gentle ride, Don M had handed me a double dose of the medicina, and the potent concoction was already snaking through my body on her way to my stomach and the worlds beyond. The journey had been a very strong one and had knocked me out until lunchtime the following day. It was hard to make sense of. The only thing I remembered clearly was my encounter and exchange with the spirit of a pretty fern-like plant, whom I had noticed growing next to my hut. Ah, what a sweetie she was. In my journey, I saw her covered in droplets of water, as if she had just been rained on. As water collected at the tips of her leaves, she extended one of them towards me. I stretched my arm out, and the droplet at the tip of the shiny leaves glittered. Hanging from the leaf edge with the same excited tension of a skydiver ready to freefall, the droplet detached, free for a fleeting moment before landing in the soft center of my cupped hand. Oringam, the plant said, as a wave of warmth hit my heart. This is our word for thank you. I was confused. Why would the plants be thanking me? I felt I should have been the one giving thanks. Thank you for listening, she continued softly, for being open to receive our gifts, for meeting us in true communion. She paused for a brief moment as she wrapped her leafy arms around me. Rocking me like a tiny babe in a deep embrace, she hushed. Now rest, child, rest. We have much work to do. A beautiful gesture glowed inside me, reverberating. The inaudible sound of her song, or ikaro, a calming but peculiar tune made of sounds I could not hear and meanings I could not decipher, resonated inside out, ringing through the temple structure of the Maloka, where Donham had just started humming the plant's sacred song. Back at the Temple of Modern Science in the university where I work, investigation on the nature of reality are carried out under standardized and controlled conditions, mostly within the sanctity of experimental laboratories. With this quest for a source of intellectual security based on objectivity and materialism, the modern scientific mode of thinking, scientific determinism, has become the accepted procedure for gaining knowledge about the world and a common denominator for Western culture. As a result, the knowledge attained by conventional science is, for the most part, an intellectual enterprise, abstracted from the subjective experience of the body, the mind, and the spirit. As pointed out by eco-philosopher David Abraham, the deterministic view of a world mechanically governed by causes and effects is commonly opposed by the spiritual idealism of New Age circles, where the ethereal nature of spiritual reality is favored over the down-to-earth nature of matter. Each obsessed with its own mythology, both worldview upholding the notion of a separation between mind, body, and spirit, and both prioritizing one aspect of nature over the other, the possibility of their full integration into unity and interdependence drops quickly out of sight. By juxtaposing the apprentice shaman wide open to the darkness of a Shipibo Maloka in a defiant wilderness, with the Western scientist locked under the brightness of fluorescent light in an off-limit, controlled environment laboratory, nature had found a way to integrate and unify the two worldviews. And the world agrees. Guided by the plants, the scientists learned to think out and away from the conventional box that measured current scientific precincts, while the shaman inspired an entirely new vision. 18 months later, this integrated perspective gave birth to the first of a series of scientific studies on plant behavioral ecology, which provided clear experimental evidence for the existence of communication channels between plants beyond those recognized and studied by science up until then. Could plants in my scientific laboratory communicate with each other with sound, like they did in the shamanic temple of the Amazon? Daring to ask this strange and impermissible question certainly invited waves of mockery in the corridors of academic science. Far more important, however, was the possibility of unlocking its revolutionary answer, and the answer did come, whispered by that tiny kernel of corn. Right, I'm gonna skip again. Jet-lagged, I walked outside the arrivals terminal of San Francisco International Airport, where a black SUV and a friendly young woman were waiting to meet me. The woman had not only come to scoop me up from the airport, but as I was about to learn, she was also going to host me at her house for the next few days, while I gathered all supplies and finalized the preparation for the forthcoming vision quest ceremony. These few days included my first meeting with the elder, to whom I offered tobacco wrapped in red cloth and respectfully made my official request for her guidance and blessing. And at this occasion, I also met my supporter, an older woman who had generously pledged to assist me in preparing for the quest. She had sewn me a lovely ceremonial dress the color of grass and procured for me a pair of hand-stitched moccasins. Later she would source beautiful bunches of white sage as offering and would eat, drink, pray, and sing for me while I was on my quest. She would also take her turn preparing food for the group at the camp, as well as help organizing the wood for the sacred fire, looking after the firekeeper, and offering fluids to the elder, who would be fasting and holding a safe container for this profound ceremony. And so, before long, there we were, a convoy of 15 to 20 people driving several hours north to a private property in the mountains, a wilderness preserve with no phones, toilets, electricity, or drinking water. This would be home to all of us for a few days. Here, the Vision Quest ceremony would take place, and no one was to leave the site once the ceremony started. And the wind arrives. Okay. At the top of my mountain, time played wilies as a skilled negotiator. I was no longer aware of how many days I had been there or how much time I had left before having to come down. A sense of anxiety started creeping in, and the dragon of doubt started spitting his fire. A fire fiercer than the sun on my skin. Would my prayer be answered? What if I hadn't been heard? What if I'd done something wrong? Was I failing? Maybe I hadn't prayed hard enough, long enough, right enough. Maybe I was not good enough. I was bearing witness to my own undoing when the oak tree spoke. Tell us stories, he stated with authority. Startled, I looked up towards the old tree. He reiterated, "You're here to tell our stories." And the conversation began. If I had pen and paper, which of course I did not, I could have written down a list of all the things that, according to the tree, I was here to do. I was fumbling around inside my mind as he, endlessly calm and steady, went on emphasizing how important my scientific work was as a medium for the plant people. I would tell their stories, which would reveal them, the plant people, to the human mind, and in so doing would deliver something humanity urgently needed to feel. Then suddenly I was there with him, truly listening, as he was saying, "There is a lot of traveling ahead of you, and many elders around the world are waiting for you to arrive." I waited for him to pause. I felt overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was describing as a second dragon, the dragon of self-pity, stomped its way in. It all sounds amazing, but it's easy for you to speak. All well and good for you who are rooted in the ground where you are provided with everything you need, I said. In my world of humans, I need money to do all the things that you're asking me to do, and without a job, how can I deliver the science you're talking about? I spoke with a lamenting tone to justify my position. I felt a sense of hopelessness. I feared that my prayer had been heard and answered, but I was not going to be able to fulfill it. How could I do all this scientific work and travel to all these places which were apparently waiting for me when I was about to lose my academic job and would have no money to even support myself? My questions were unspoken, but the tree heard them all the same. He shredded his leaves as if a breeze had come out of nowhere to move them and replied, "You need not worry about those boring details. We are well aware of your needs, and every single one of them has already been taken care of." I didn't understand, and the old tree seemed totally disinterested in explaining any further. I assumed our conversation was over, but I was wrong. Still, I looked away, took a deep breath, and with it, I took in the whole view. It was magnificent. I was sitting at the top of a mountain, as close to the turquoise skies as I could be. Two bald eagles were swooping through the air at an incredible speed, doing the most spectacular tricks as they plunged down into the valley below, and then hitchhiked a ride up on the thermal to pass me at eye level. With their wings spread wide open, they looked as if they were floating effortlessly. As I watched them, I started feeling their lightness in my own body, and for a moment I too were gliding with ease, looking down at the deep velvet of the untouched coniferous forest that dressed the size of the range all around me. As though I had temporarily acquired the notoriously sharp eyesight of those eagles, possibly the most powerful pair of eyes in the animal kingdom. My own eyes were able to pick up fine details in the field of green and then magnify them with a power 4 to 8 times that of a normal eyesight. I could see the whole forest, each tree as well as the tiniest grasses growing next to me. And as I acknowledged their individual presence, they all chimed loudly in unison, "Tell our stories, tell our stories." I'm gonna skip again. It was early morning, November 5th, 2012. I remember the date very well because my existing fellowship finished on that day. On campus earlier than the usual working hours, I had come to pack my office. My laptop was open on my desk as books of many colors and sizes started coming off the shelf that had been their home for the previous few years. Some landed in a box that I planned to take home. Others were assigned to the giveaway pile. Several pieces of experimental equipment came out of hiding in the cupboard where I stored them when they were not in use. In their different shapes and kinds, including some I had custom built to suit the needs of my research, they looked weird and beautiful. They were the creative tools of a trade designed to explore and reimagine the world. My throat tightened, and the profound anxiety that had silently accompanied me for the whole year was unleashed in all its ferocity. Then, the familiar sound of an incoming email drew my attention to my computer screen. It was from a friend and colleague in Canberra, which by virtue of being in Australian Eastern Daylight Time was 3 hours ahead of Perth. The working day had not yet started for me was in full swing on the other side of the country. I read the email twice and responded curtly, "Nice joke, not in the mood, packing the office." My friend replied with just one line, "Here is the link, check it yourself." My throat tightened even harder because now my heart was throbbing in it. I clicked on the link and searched for my surname, and there it was, on the Australian Research Council funding announcement webpage. In total disbelief, my shaking hands typed, "Holy shit, I got it!" in my reply to my friend. I had just been awarded a 3-year research fellowship for my plant research. I looked out my office window, and there they were, swaying with the wind as they laughed their leafy heads off from their grand heights. Big teardrops rained from the blue sky of my eyes onto my keyboard. Shaking and sobbing, I left my office, hurried down 2 flights of stairs to the main entrance of the building, and walked outside. Overwhelmed, I looked up and cried and sobbed and laughed hysterically. I finally understood what I had not been able to grasp on the top of the mountain. Everything has been taken care of, exactly as the oak tree had spoken. A flood of relief and gratitude rushed through my body to wash away the debris of anxiety and doubt, while I repeated, thank you," over and over. Beaming, the trees stood tall and proud around me and waited for a moment longer before speaking their silent words. "We told you, but you were not listening." Then, like a fresh breeze, their whispers smiled inside my heart, and they continued, "Dear child, you are never alone." And added, "Now, wipe away those tears and go for it. There is a lot of work to do." Thank you so much, everyone, and I really hope the festival is a great success. Many blessings from Australia. that's it.
Hey, hi.
Hello.
We've got Monica. I almost said Lexi. We've got Monica here with us live. Thank you so much for the reading of the book. Oh, that was so beautiful. I'm really enjoying learning, hearing about listening to the plants. And thanks for joining us today. Mhm.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Um, would you tell us more, like about the process of learning to hear from the learning? There's a hearing and a healing that seems to happen. That there's this it's both of these things at the same time. And
Hmm.
what that process of opening up is, like as you were reading, you were talking about like the Western mind, like categorizing like the different like pharmaceutical aspects of the plant into a way of like understanding and rationalizing, but that there's this like far wider scope of knowledge when we can be quiet to listen to the plant itself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, big big question. Um, I guess I should start by saying that there is nothing actually wrong with the mind. You know, I hear often, especially in certain environments, a certain circle, how like you just have to get rid of the mind. You just have to, wash away your ego, and then you'll be free. And but if that was the case, we wouldn't even have this conversation because I wouldn't be able to speak or to, put words together. So the mind has its place, and also, in the context of, the pharmaceutical aspect of it, like that also has its place. I feel like, there are many different tools in the box with all, the toolkit, and we should be able to use as much as we have or whatever we have available.
Mhm.
So the question is not so much about, like being critical of one aspect and favoring the other for me, but it's more about being honoring the aspects of us. And the Western mind has a role in creating certain things. They might not be always the appropriate things needed, right? So if you have a job that requires a hammer, then use the hammer. But if you need a scalpel, a fine scalpel, use the fine scalpel. And so for me, the Western mind, of course, as a scientist, I use it all the time. I have to, and it's really useful. It's just how it serves the bigger purpose, or the deeper purpose, I should say. And so in that context, the wider space that you are referring to and pointing to is what, at least in my own personal journey, plants have allowed me to enter into. Again, is I want to clarify that it's not just plants. The space can be entered in so many different ways. That it just happened to me that for me, it was the plants is the space that resonates with my own nature. But whether you are resonating with the air or with the sunlight or with the mushroom or with the stones or whatever, it doesn't really matter. What all of these is pointing at for me is just be careful not to just think that reality is all what the mind is producing. Because that is often, of a particular kind only, and so it can only produce a certain outcome, and it's actually quite predictable too. So the other space has all potentiality contained in that. So because it doesn't have any form, so it can take any form. And so in that sense, from a creative perspective, as a scientist, be able to listen to both spaces, I think is what I'm trying to learn to do. And I guess the plants have been really generous as teachers for me to engage with both spaces and learn when it's appropriate to use one, when it's appropriate to use the other, and how to combine them and integrate them, which ultimately I think is what I'm not aiming, but like what my journey is about.
Right, and that's what you
Integration.
detail in the book, and with your work as an evolutionary ecologist and gaining I guess, what could be called intuitive insight into how to conduct your experiments with the plants. That has helped lead to more understanding and plant cognition, memory, and learning. Would you say more about that, or like with the experiment with the peas?
Sure. I guess the first thing that I should say is that, again, there is nothing special about this. There is only one question to be asked, and is why. Once the why is being asked, then all of the rest just arrives. And why really it's about wonder, is about, being curious, be childlike, but not childish, and that's why probably kids always like obsess their parents with like, but why, but why, but why, just shut up. Like, I don't know why. But that's the point, is like, can we be comfortable with not knowing why? That's why the why is such a big question to be put there as much as possible, and acknowledging that, we know so little. And in reality, all of those, in the context of science, for example, all of those the scientists that we remember are those that have asked important whys, and then they allowed for like the not knowing the answer, so that the answer could arrive. And all of that process, of course, it requires the mind at some point, but really the initial stage, the mind will be just trying to give the answer, and the answer is based on what it already knows. While in all those cases, there was the intuitive part of us coming through. And for some people, it was a bathtub. For some people, it was an apple dropping from the tree. From some people, there depends. But at the end, that moment of pause where you're just like, okay, I don't know what the answer is, but there is this why that is really bothering me. And can I be comfortable in staying in that space of not knowing and allowing for the answer to arise? And again, it will arise first from the heart and from your inner self. And then the mind, if it's been trained properly, will give it shape. And in a sense, it could be also described as the masculine and feminine principle of the self. So it's like you have the feminine principle creating and open to the creation of, but then it needs to be realized, so manifest and created into matter, which is what the masculine principle does. So even like the idea of self-realization really is like, it's our attempt to materialize the self. So is the intuitive, the feminine coming into matter and becoming the masculine, which is the active principle of. So as you can see, like it sounds very metaphysical or whatever, but actually it's quite practical. And it's very down to earth, because that's what the earth does all the time. So as earth beings, we are just learning to remember again how to do that. And it's interesting, because for me, the question that I've asked in relation to my research with plants, and you just mentioned, the peas and the learning and memory, really, the plants don't need to really learn anything. What they're showing is like, do you remember, you forgot about this? And so the experiments are kind of, I am the one that they are experimenting on, rather than the other way around. And so even, and through those experiments, even breaking down the preconceived idea, what I think I should know, what I think it is, because it's what we have established already, which is the mind really talking, and then breaking that down. It's like, what about if you actually don't know? Are you then prepared to open and just see what comes up, instead of like, and I suspect that, actually I know that if without that moment of breaking down, undoing the preconceived idea, some of my experiments would have failed, in the sense that I would have missed what was being shown to me, like in a scientific way. And with the peas, of course, was very clear, because I was about to shut down the entire experiment, thinking that it wasn't working. And after 2 weeks of really hard piloting and, being in the lab every day and doing a lot of work, and I was like, well, okay, so I tried, but peas actually can learn like the dog.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that very moment of pause which just arose, and I felt like, I think there was a moment of lack as well. There was a moment in which the pause arose and I was able to stop there and stay in that pause for a little bit, enough to see that there was something else being shown here, and I wasn't watching, I wasn't paying attention, I wasn't listening. And the moment of the pause allowed me for that listening. And when that was allowed, it's like, oh, actually, there is something here, and it was right in front of my eyes all along, and I couldn't see it, which helps me as well to, find reach the understanding or the appreciation, I should say, of some of the positions that my colleagues take when they are, disagreeing, or they don't like what I'm doing, or whatever it is that they're feeling. But this feeling of tension, I guess, because I experience the same tension within myself, and so this tension between us is actually a tension that was within me as well. And I understand that, yeah, it's okay. You don't need to like it. I'm just doing the work that is for me to do. So
And that, so your work, you've described it as like kind of like poking like at the, I guess, like at the box, like, right, like you're the challenges, the parameters of Western science. And but as a scientist, why would you not challenge those parameters? But that's the yeah, I guess the holy grail, or the set of rules, or that you're supposed to obey by in your experiments of taken a more open direction into examining what the confines between Western thinking and the openness that you were describing.
I guess I should mention that there is there is anxiety within this, but it's not like it's again, it's that tension, but it's not, I'm not saying it as anxiety as a negative thing. I'm talking of anxiety as a useful tool. So, you get to this box and you're quite comfortable with it for a while, and then you reach the edges of the box, if you're lucky, and literally you're bumping against it, and that's where the anxiety arises, because you know that you are constrained, and your mind is like, we should be comfortable here, but we're not. And so then it's that is the really delicate moment of like, can you again stay with your anxiety, which is pointing to the boundary that are bounding you, and the box that is constraining you, and allow for the anxiety to be, so that you can actually feel, it's almost like you're feeling the walls, right? And then you can break them down. And this applies not just for science, but to me applies for everything in my life. So whenever I feel anxious, I don't like it. Of course, I don't. Exactly. I'm not like thriving in anxiety, but I'm grateful to it in the sense that I recognize now why it's there and what it's trying to tell me. And it's an invitation. It's an invitation to grow beyond the boundary that you have self-imposed, really, because you're subscribing to them. So obviously you are comfortable with them, and they're useful until they're no more. And so you have to grow. And I guess that's what my science, that's what my science is done for me, as me personally, but also I think that's the anxiety that some of my colleagues are experiencing when they come across the science that I've done, because that science is talking to the box that they are still subscribing to. So it's inviting them to come closer to the wall within which they are locked in. And I know, like, you don't want to be disturbed. You're quite happy in your box. Like, keep me here and I'm fine. But so I don't know.
Wow. Yeah, you've described experiences of sometimes like being shunned by colleagues, and that so that this part of this larger journey. But I the takeaway that I was getting from what you were just describing is this inner and outer journey that's simultaneous, and that one reflects the other. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. There is
yeah,
no inner or outer, basically. But it looks a bit like that. So,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I guess the
Yeah.
refinement, the refinement, at least for
Uh-huh.
me, the refinement is about
Mhm.
making sure that the inner is so empty that it allows for that emptiness to overflow out what I perceive as outside. And by doing that, then allows for anything to arise and everything, it can be welcome because it doesn't really matter. And I can see it as like, oh, if something arises over there is because I haven't actually allowed for the emptiness, complete emptiness inside. And so anything that arises outside belongs to me. And I
Okay.
can,
That
I
sounds
can
very
speak to
Buddhist.
it
Yeah. Wow.
because it's
Um,
me. I don't even
um,
know if it makes any sense, but hey, this is how
it does. It does. Thank you.
There's some people that are showing some love to you, saying you have serene storytelling and it brought distinct visuals. So cool.
Oh, Lexi said that. That was our last speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
obviously whatever they are seeing is arising from their own emptiness, and so it belongs to them.
Yeah.
and Outdoor Mittens said, beautiful! Exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. So it received really well. I can tell people really enjoyed hearing you speak.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Monica, would you say more about your plant medicine practice in Dayada when you were in Peru?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I assume those first listening with the plants.
Kind of. I think for me, we're a deepening. They started in my garden, really, and as often is the case, this again there is a. It's almost like there is a moment that I perceived, and we, in general, I think we perceive as a crisis. And that's the anxiety that gets escalated when you're not listening.
Mhm.
And so everything starts breaking down, because if you're not going to do it, well,
Mhm.
life will do it for you. So it's up to you whether you want to go kicking and screaming or gracefully as much as you can.
Mhm.
And so for me, it started because I had to change. I had experiences in my work as a marine scientist and with my fish on the Great Barrier Reef, where I did a lot of research before turning to plants, and I still kind of do. And I think my fishes will come back eventually at some point. But and so it was for me, it was started as an ethical crisis of like, how am I going to do my research without, the breaking to pieces what I'm studying, which it's one of the demands of science, at least some of the science, and certainly the kind of science that I was doing.
Mhm.
And it never bothered me until it did, and
Mhm.
then I couldn't not see what I was doing.
Mhm.
And I was doing. I went to, as I did every year, I went to this Vipassana retreat for the 10 days, and I had done it for many years, many times, and then that one time it just really got me, and it was like,
Mhm.
you have no rights to kill anything.
Mhm.
Look at the blood dripping off your hands. And it
Whew.
was very strong. Yeah, it was very strong. So I came out of that thinking, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I tried to change my science, still working with the fish, and make sure that I wouldn't kill anything. But it became very clear to me that they had a very limited lifetime, because science demanded a sacrifice. And I wasn't prepared to be the one doing it, or to be the one agreeing to it. And
Sure.
so that's when the plants kind of came to me for in assistance. I would say I often think of it as they rescued the scientist in me, because I think at that point I was prepared to just walk away. And they're like, well, actually, no, wait, not so fast. And
Wow.
so you got stuff to do still. How about you take our leads? We don't mind, you know. So it really started by, you know, with the plants in my garden, and we just moved to this new place because I moved from one side of the country to the other side to take up a position, and so we were setting up, you know, our new veggie garden, and and it was like chili plants and basil plants, like, you know, your very friendly neighbors, and those actually are the plants that I experimented with first. Those are the very first study that I did with the plants. And then from there, it just escalated. It's just like, you know, more plants arrived and inspiring different questions. And then, of course, because I'm, I think, naturally just curious, you know, I started exploring different spaces. And then, I've always dreamt a lot. And I didn't know that dreaming was going to be such an important thing. And then it was what guided me to many of the places and many of the experiences that I had. So I ended up in Peru out of a dream.
Oh, wow.
The first time. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea what I was going to be experiencing. I just went totally with no expectation, no agenda, really. I didn't know really anything. And still I don't. But and it was an incredibly hard experience and an incredibly humbling and rewarding experience. And then many others followed from there. And I am very... I'm very grateful to certain plants. Of course, ayahuasca was played a big role, still does. There are other plants that I know many people are interested in that are definitely not for me. And the plants themselves were very clear. It's like, don't come here. I was like, okay.
You
So I do not touch.
you
And I do not touch because it's easy to listen. It's easy to listen when it seems like the plant is inviting you. But if you're really listening, then you should also back off when they say, no, you're not welcome here. This is not for, like, we're not here to have a relationship. So,
Wow.
okay. But the one that I do have a relationship is a very deep one. And you know, the ayahuasca, for instance, has been with me for like over a decade now. And and it informs me all the time. It's here right now. And all of the plants that I worked with in that process of dieta, they are all here right now. And for some of them, I know that I can be like, you know, having a little chai at the beach or something with a friend. And then if it's required, the plants out of the blue will arrive and it will arise through me. And it will be like, oh, you know, we need to share this. And so I often have to like, sorry, but, you know, I need to tell you this thing. And it makes no sense to me, but it makes sense to the other person. So then there is an opening and it's amazing because then the opening is really like there is a conversation that involves a much bigger space and it's got nothing to do with me. I'm not, you know, first of all, there's nothing special about this. It's actually our normal state. It's just that we don't allow it to be. And I don't know, I guess the plants forced me to learn how to be more human through these experiences. And now I'm just simply allowing them to be what we really are. And I talk about we because I feel like I'm a collective of rather than an individual. So
I hate to cut you short, but we're gonna have to wrap up our Q&A with you for
that's
now.
all right.
No, so yeah. But again, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Yeah, and glad that you could join us from Australia tonight.
Yeah.
I hope everything. I know everything will be great.